Good afternoon, everyone, and I want to welcome you to this episode of the Better Together Facebook Live. I am your host, Barb Roos, and if you are joining us for the first time, this Better Together Facebook Live show is where we talk about all the things, and this is where we find the hope, the help, as well as the practical next steps so that we can all get better together. Today, we've got a bonus episode for you. Normally, I run this show on my author page, but today I've invited those of you on my regular Facebook page as well as live on YouTube. And you can watch us on Roku because we're going to talk about trauma today, especially the topic of healing trauma. And so if you've been through difficult events in your past, events where you have struggled to figure out the next step toward what healing is like, if your heart feels broken inside of your chest because of something that happened, whether in your family, in you personally, or you just generally feel broken because of what's happening in our world, I'm so glad you're here for today's show. I've got a friend who is an outstanding professional who is going to provide the education and the information that you need, especially if you've been dealing with trauma in your life. And so I'm going to bring her out in just a couple of moments. I want to share one thing for you because it has been exactly 1 week since the release of my new Bible study titled Breakthrough, Finding Freedom in Christ. And so if you are a Bible study person, I know that this is on my regular Facebook page and YouTube. And so not everyone does Bible study, but most of you do. So this is a Bible study about finding freedom from the fear of not being enough for God. If you've ever questioned whether or not God still loves you, if you've ever felt like you've had to be a better Christian and you've been burning out, or if you just love Bible study, this is a 6-week Bible study on the book of Galatians. And you and I walk together through 6 powerful truths that will allow you to become free from fear so that you can live fully alive in God's joy and purpose for your life. And so we are going to drop in a link to the Breakthrough Bible study. As you can see, it's absolutely beautiful. And I would love for you to get some friends together and join the Breakthrough Bible study. You can actually start a group yourself after Mother's Day. Go for it. So if you're joining us for the broadcast today, you know how much we love things being interactive. So I would love for you to go ahead and drop in and say hello. And in fact, we've got an icebreaker question for you today, because in a moment, we're going to talk about something pretty fun as we talk about healing from trauma. So today's icebreaker question, and stick with me, is, have you ever gone horseback riding? Now, for me, this is a pretty loaded question, and I was talking with my fabulous producer, Tabitha, about it. And so Tabitha, she takes care of the show backstage for me. But Tabitha and I were talking about this question. And so Tabitha, do you have a moment to come out? Because you and I both had some fun conversation about going horseback riding. So everybody, this is my fabulous producer, Tabitha. Tabitha, have you ever gone horseback riding?
I have gone horseback riding. I am actually from Canada, but one of our family vacations when I was around 9, 10 was to Texas. And so if you go to Texas, you kind of have to go horseback riding to get the full experience. And so we went, and my horse kind of took off with me as I was riding it. And I remember being very scared. The guys who worked there later told me that the horse was just trotting, but I was pretty sure it was galloping. So yeah, it took off, leaving my family behind. And that was my first and only horseback riding experience. So that's my story, Barb. How about you?
You know, I feel like you and I both, we must have had the same horse, because I've only ridden a horse one time. I was 9 years old and I was in my babysitter's backyard. And as I was riding the horse, I got really scared and I began to lean, and eventually I was going to fall off the horse, but I managed to grab a clothesline at the last second. So I dangled from a clothesline. So you and I, well, horses haven't necessarily been our thing, have they?
No, they have not.
Well, thank you, Tabitha, for coming out and sharing your story. And audience, if you want to, if you're watching this live or on the replay, we'd love to hear from you. But today we actually have a professional with us because as we talk about healing from trauma today, there's actually a fantastic new therapy out there that we're going to tell you about. And so I want for us to meet today's guest. I'm going to read her introduction, and she's going to join us in just a moment. And so, Elisa Pulliam, she is the founder of MoreToBe.com, where she offers biblically based coaching and coaching training for women, as well as in-person equine-assisted coaching for women's families and leadership teams. We'll talk about that in a moment. Elisa's passion is to see women align their lives with God's best through the pursuit of whole life healing. Woo! This is good. She is the host of the More to Be podcast and author of numerous books and Bible studies, including Meet the New You, Unblinded Faith, and Impact Together. Lisa's joys include her relationship with God, her husband of nearly 25 years, their 4 nearly grown-up kids. Please welcome to the Better Together Facebook Live, my friend Lisa Pulliam.
Hey, so glad to be here with you.
I am thrilled to be here with you as well. And as we ask today's icebreaker question about horses, for you, when was the first time you ever rode a horse?
Well, I can't remember, so it was probably 3 on a pony ride. My uncle was a horse guy, and so I have early memories of pony rides. I have high school memories of being thrown off horses as I rode competitively for some time. Yeah, so I've been on horses my whole life.
Fantastic. Now, do you watch Heartland?
Oh, do I watch Heartland? Yes. My daughter and I binge watch Heartland. Yes, we have not missed a single episode.
Yeah, so Tabitha and I were talking about it. And so if you're watching today, Heartland is one of Canada's longest running TV shows. It's about a family that owns a lot of horses. I've watched every episode. Now, Tabitha is from Canada. She and I had a conversation. She has not seen Heartland yet.
What? That's not possible.
I know, but she is so super fabulous that, well, I forgave her. So,
Yeah.
But today we're going to talk about why we're having such conversations about horses. But first, Lisa, today our topic is about healing from trauma.
Yeah.
And this is an area where God has specially gifted you to help others. And so for our conversation today, normally we play an icebreaker, but we kind of did it in the horse story. So we're going to get right into things because there is a lot of trauma that people have gone through, and then the pandemic has brought on more. So let's start with a basic question. And can you define what trauma is, as well as the different types of trauma that people go through?
Absolutely. And the timing is really interesting because I have just written a paper for grad class on PTSD. And so one thing I really want to distinguish is that trauma and a diagnosis of PTSD are not necessarily the same thing. We all go through trauma in our lifetime, but only about 10% of the population will be diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. And so it really, I think that's an important fact because it then normalizes the fact that our body will have a physiological response to something that feels threatening. And so an experience that happens, an isolated experience or an ongoing experience can cause your body to stay in that trauma state. And so what we say about trauma is that trauma should be an experience. It should be a state, not a trait. And what happens, I mean, this is really an important concept. It comes from Dr. Bruce Perry. What happens is when our brain perceives the need for survival and goes into that fight, flight, freeze, faint, or fawn, and fawn is faking it mode, and stays in that place, that's when what is meant to enable us to run from harm or protect ourselves from harm becomes a way of living. And what is said is that our brain basically muscles up and we have trouble expressing our emotions. We have trouble feeling physiological sensations. We have trouble connecting with others. We live in a state of fear and alarm. And so common examples of trauma would be an unexpected death of a loved one. witnessing a death of a loved one or a friend, a car accident, a harm like that. But we could also experience a traumatic response to being blindsided in a relationship, and a betrayal, a form of adultery. We can experience the effects of trauma when we are living in a certain place for a period of time, and suddenly we lose our job, and now we have to go live someplace else, and we didn't see it coming. So there are lots of things that can cause our bodies and our brains to respond to the threat of harm, and it's very subjective. So two people going through the same situation may not process it the same way.
And so that is very helpful. What are some ways that people physiologically are experiencing trauma that they might be attributing to something else?
Yeah, absolutely. So your initial reaction is like, okay, so I'm nervous being on this, right? And I am noticing what's going on in my body. My hands are clammy because my blood is concentrated on my primary organs, because there feels like, oh no, what's going to happen, right? That's just a stage fright experience. But when we experience a real legitimate fear of harm in some way, your body will have that same response. And so in order to cope with that fear, you can shut down. So somebody who's living in a trauma state may not want to talk about what happened in the past. They could have been a foster child, and they don't want to go back and talk about their foster care experience. And so that is hindering their ability to emotionally and present, like be present and connect with people and connect with God, a God-given purpose that they have in their life, because they have shut down from something from the past. Another two like kind of classic symptoms of trauma is hypervigilance, where you're continually trying to get ahead and self-protect. So perfectionism, workaholism, overperformance. I got to get ahead of it before the bad thing happens. And that kind of, habit is really esteemed. To be productive is esteemed. But if you're doing it out of a place of fear, that's not healthy.
Ooh, that is so helpful. And as people are listening and they're thinking about, okay, we've all gone through really hard things in life.
Yeah.
Everybody's experienced some level of trauma. But what are some of the warning signs that people need to think about for themselves that they need intervention because the trauma is really negatively affecting their lives?
Yeah, so I would say a struggle with anger was the cue for me to go for counseling. My reactions to what was going on in everyday life were disproportionate with what was happening. And I needed to figure out, why was I on this short fuse and needed to deal with my anger. And what happened for me was that the ages of my kids was triggering memories of my childhood that I had shut away. And when I got into counseling, I was able to walk through that process of acknowledging, processing the memories, healing from the memories, walking through prayer, walking through scripture truths that I had learned for that decade prior, but didn't really sink into the brain. And finally saying, okay, God, move me through this healing process and the process of forgiveness. So that was, so when you have relationship cycles that you keep hitting the same wall and you're in the same loop with people over and over again, when you have habits that you can't break, when you are praying, when you're studying, doing your Bible study, you're going to church, you're doing all the right things, but something isn't clicking, I would say that would be a good time to seek intervention.
That right there is very, very powerful. And so just to recap, if there are relational cycles or patterns that you cannot break, if you feel like you're doing all of the things that are healthy and you need to do, and there's still high levels of fear and anxiety, for me, it was really feedback from others when they
Mhm.
just said, "Are you sure you're okay? Are you
Yeah.
sure you're okay?" And I had a blind spot where I kept powering through thinking I was okay. And so God used others to help me realize. So
Yeah.
now, but going and getting help is scary.
Yeah.
So, Lisa, what are some of the barriers that people are facing when they know they need help? What are some of the things that keep people from actually getting help?
Right. Well, I think the stigma of you're crazy if if you need to go to a counselor, or I heard this recently from somebody. I don't know who to go to because how do I know they're not a kook? There's a stigma that a therapist is going to take you down some, crazy therapeutic method, and you're going to be worse in the long run. And so I would say, and just like you make other decisions in your life with a search on Google to try to find what you're looking for, there are some things to look for. So licensed mental health professional, licensed counselor, licensed social worker, psychiatrist, those are their keywords. But then also looking for the language of how do they go about their process? What are they sharing with their story? And just like, when you go look for a house or an apartment, you check out a couple before you figure out what one's the right fit for you.
Right.
You have to meet with a couple of people potentially. And usually that first session is an intake. So you don't usually know if it's a good feedback because they're going to be asking about your story. And it might take a couple of sessions. And I would say with anything, you need to give it a wholehearted try. But if there's a check in your spirit that this is not a good fit, that doesn't mean counseling is not for you. It means that therapeutic relationship is not the right fit. And it's time to explore one or two or three other options until you find it.
I love that. Over
Yeah.
the years, I spent a decade in counseling because of what the trauma that was happening in me and then in our family.
Yeah.
And over the years, I switched counselors. I
Yep.
think I had 4 over the years. And it wasn't because there was anything wrong with them. It was what I needed at the time as I was changing and growing and what was happening in my life and what they had to offer. There would be like 18 months to 2 years with one, and then it was 3 years with another, and then just a year with one, and then like 4 years with it. And so it was recognizing that that it had to be a fit, and that I couldn't make a summary judgment of, oh, I'm not getting anything out of it, this isn't working.
Yeah. So, and let me add 2 things to that. I've learned through being in graduate school, there are more approaches to psychotherapy than there are denominations of faith.
Dang, that's a
So,
lot.
so uh, depending upon the specialty and what kind of practice that therapist feels most comfortable with, your experience can be very different. And so a cognitive behavior therapist can do a lot of talk therapy, whereas a somatic therapist is going to do more body stuff. And some people are going to have combinations of it. So you've got the therapeutic model that's going to impact your healing, but you personally are going to go through layers of transformation. And initially, when people reach out for therapy or coaching, it's because there's a hot problem. And the first part of that is to stabilize and to figure out what do I need to do now? But then the next layer, and I see this in scripture, it's going back to the root of the issue. And it's healing. Where did this start? How did this mindset begin? What is my perspective on it? And so your needs for healing moving forward will change as well. And that could mean I need to shift to somebody who takes a different approach.
That's good. Well, and as you were talking about the different kinds of therapy that are out there,
Yeah.
we want to talk about some important first steps that people can take. And this is fun for me because I was scrolling through your Instagram. You and I are friends on Instagram. And
Yeah.
months ago, you began a program of equine assisted therapy. And so right now, first of all, because you told us about your horse history, give us, we've got a couple of pictures here.
Yeah.
As we talk about equine assisted therapy, first, let's meet some friends of yours. And so my fabulous producer, Tabitha, she's got some photos. So first, introduce us to these guys.
Yeah. So on the left, that guy was Alex, and he was somebody that I was able to work with during my training. And he really helped me see how quickly a horse could connect with me. And up until that point in my training, it was an area of struggle. And so in therapy, in coaching, equine coaching, you're building a relationship with the horse, but the relationship principles apply to your relationships with humans. So you get to show up as you are and see what kind of like awareness working with that horse brings. So when a horse doesn't want to connect with you, how rejected do you feel? And moving forward. And Alex was a gracious guy, eager for connection. And so that I would go into the stall when I would visit him, and he would lean into me like that to get a good scrub on his neck. He was really quick to show me the parts that he liked to have rubbed. And then Teddy is my equine partner now. He's the one that I'm doing sessions with, and brand new relationship with him. And he is a teddy bear, but the poor guy is scared to death of everything outside of his skin. And he is new to the farm where I'm at, relatively new, and there's no backstory about him. But he has a startle response that is very classic for a human being who has PTSD suffering, that loud noises causes you to startle. Things that happen cause you to startle. And his feet will leave the ground, not in an aggressive way, but he's just scared. And he does something else too. He holds his breath when he is anxious. And so it's very interesting to work with him and see how your brain can have a response to something that manifests in your body. And I think as humans, we are really disconnected between those two connections. And that is work that we can do in an equine coaching, equine therapy setting, is becoming more aware of what's going on in our body and in our thought life.
Oh, that's powerful. Well,
yeah.
as we are talking about some of the equine therapy, one of the things that you had provided was a video clip of you with one of the horses. And so we want to show folks just an overview of how equine assisted therapy is actually a wonderful first step toward healing from trauma. So we've got a short video clip to show here right now.
Coaching session. So my training is trauma informed and has a deep understanding of the brain and how we have been wounded by the experiences that we've gone through in our life and how we've processed them, we bring into our next relationship. And so a lot of this work is very healing and discovering why you do what you do and how come you end up in the same relationship patterns, leadership patterns, work patterns over and over again. And so the idea is learning about those patterns and learning how to break them and see.
So in this case, as the video continued, you mentioned that the horse had kind of zoned out a little bit, but then we start to see the horse moving a little bit. What was he doing?
Yeah, so this is disassociation versus being present, and we do it as humans, right? And so Teddy was kind of checked out, and then something will come up, and it could have been that he felt me relax. Whereas when I'm task oriented, when I start a video, I've got to shoot a video, right? As opposed to I started talking, and as I started talking, my brain, I'm moving up in my limbic system, and I'm more emotionally present. I'm connecting with him. And so he's also able to relax with me. And that licking and chewing, and you saw he turned his head in a little bit to me. He was like, oh, I'm back and you're there. And part of what I have learned is to become more aware of who's in my presence, whether it be a horse or a person. So everything that you do in a session with a horse, you get to translate to a session outside. You get to take it into your real life, and you have a new level of awareness of who you are and what you're bringing into your relationships and your leadership and your performance and your personal disciplines. It translates to everything.
Beautiful. Well, if you're watching us live or on the replay, my guest today is Lisa Pulliam, and she is the founder of moretobee.com. She also is certified in equine assisted therapy. And audience, if you're joining us, I would love for you to jump in and share your answer to the question. We're talking about healing from trauma. And so, what is the hardest part about healing, the healing process for you? And we've got some options there that you can plunk in or that you can drop in. But Lisa, as you are now certified for equine assisted coaching, what are some of the outcomes that people can expect, and how does working with horses, just summarize again how that helps people heal?
Yeah. So I'll answer it this way. We can find healing in Jesus Christ. Okay. But God has designed us as part of the body, and we need people. Whether or not we have a faith in Jesus Christ, we still need people. There's a need for belonging. And in that need for belonging, there's a need to be seen, heard, acknowledged, and being in the presence of a horse, you work out what your need is. You begin to recognize what it feels like when that horse doesn't turn to come through to you. So if you watch the continuation of that video and the other videos that I've made available for your community to watch, you make a request in an equine therapy session for connection. There's no lead rope on, there's no halter. You, in your body energy, are asking for that horse to connect with you, and you will walk away from that horse and ask for connection. And what happens when that horse chooses not to come connect with you, all your stuff starts to show up. And you've got to work through how you feel about that with the support of the coach and the support of the therapist. And you get to see how much are you willing to invest in a relationship before you run for the hills.
Wow.
How angry do you get when you're not being acknowledged? And so what happens in an equine therapy session is things that you can fake and deny in an office setting because there's no exposure. You can play the card that you want to play.
Yeah.
And we as human to humans have gotten very good at playing the role the other person wants. Right? But we can't, a horse in an equine coaching session won't play the role. They're their own being. They're with their own feelings and with their own issues, their own checked outness, their own hypervigilance, their own, need to control, whatever it is. It's pretty powerful.
That is very powerful. Oh, wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. And for our audience, we had Kristen. She came in for our question, and she said for her, she said originally for her, it's C, loss of control, D, trust issues, but initially E, anger with God. So Kristen, thank you for sharing that. Now, Lisa, as we are getting ready to wrap today's show up, the last question is about coaching, and the question of whether or not coaching is a right next step for someone. You are a certified coach, and you particularly work with women and leadership teams, as well as women who lead. And so tell us about your coaching practice, as well as a membership group that you have that we're going to put a link in.
Yeah, sure. So coaching is for you if you want support in moving forward. You want to have that wholehearted healing and breakthrough. And so the More to Be, I have a team of coaches at More to Be. These are women who I have actually trained to become certified coaches. So I trust them with whoever comes my way. And so you figure out if you need therapy versus coaching by starting either. If you feel more comfortable starting with a coach, you could start with a coach. Our coaches are trained to know if you need therapy. You start with a therapist if that's what you have access to, and that's what is the next best step for you. Both are part of the process of helping you gain awareness, gaining life skills, gaining a new way of thinking and processing information. The distinguishing mark is that a therapist, a licensed mental health therapist, will be able to diagnose you if you are struggling with anxiety, depression, PTSD, any sort of mood disorder, that's where you would be able to really find the treatment plan with a therapist as opposed to a coach who's not going to diagnose you.
Love it. And as a next step, if you're watching, audience, we actually have Lisa's, it's Take the Align quiz.
Yes.
And my fabulous producer, Tabitha, just dropped the link in the comments. And so, Lisa, tell us about the Align quiz. Who is it for and what can they find out?
Yeah, it's for any woman who wants to take the quiz. I suppose some men could take it if they want to, but it's really to help you see, are you ready for counseling for your healing journey? Are you ready for coaching because you're in a healed place, but you need some clarity moving forward? Or are you at a place where it's time for you to pour back and give and become a coach for yourself, whether you're going to use it to launch a coaching practice or just integrate the skill set of coaching in your relationships, with your leadership team? It's a life-changing skill.
Beautiful. Well, and so audience, you can go ahead and click on the link in the comments. And if you want an ongoing community, Lisa, you have a membership group for women. And so this is just an episode with a lot of resources. And so if you're watching today, particularly if you're a woman who has been dealing with trauma, a woman who wants to move forward, who wants to live with purpose, we've got lots of opportunities for you. So tell us about this membership group.
Yeah, so the Sisterhood is an easy membership to be a part of because you don't have to show up if you don't want to. It gives you access to all the resources that we've produced, video teachings, worksheets, Bible studies, life breakthrough resources that you can find in that. And I want to add one more thing about trauma. Trauma can also be being in a relationship with somebody who is an alcoholic, who's addicted to pornography, who is struggling with any version of addiction, who is struggling with mental health issues. That can leave you in a traumatic state. And being the parent of a child, the child of a parent, it sometimes you can have what feels like your stuff together, but everybody around you doesn't. And that can put you in a trauma state.
Absolutely, without a doubt. I know that firsthand. Well, thank you for all of the resources. And for everyone listening today, my guest has been Lisa Pulliam of moretobee.com. If you just jumped in on the episode towards the end, go back and listen from the beginning. Today, Lisa talked about the different kinds of trauma, as well as the barriers, how to deal with and overcome the barriers, and the first steps, including her new equine assisted therapy program. So Lisa, thank you for all of the great resources today. This has been sensational.
Thanks for having me. My hope is for healing and breakthrough.
Love it. And so audience, if you've enjoyed the episode, please share it with those in your life who you know have been dealing with trauma. And if you want to watch again, this episode is going to be housed at barbruce.com on the blog page. Every Tuesday at 4:30 Eastern Daylight Time, we have new episodes of the Better Together Facebook Live, and we would love for you to join us. So thank you for being a part of this week's episode, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.